Welcome to the Speckled Truth Podcast. This is the only show dedicated to the conservation of the trophy trout population from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. Here, we go below the surface to discuss what happens when science and anglers work together for a cause. Gear up with your host, Captain Chris Bush, a trophy trout purist, leader and educator within the fishing community, as he talks about all things big speckled trout. Get ready for the slimy, salty truth, better known as the Speckled Truth.
Hey everyone, want to welcome you back to the Speckled Truth Podcast. Captain Chris here with a very special guest. And to be brutally honest, very humbled today to be talking to this man, and that's Mr. Eric Bachnik from MirrOlure. Sir,
Hey,
how you doing?
I'm doing great, Captain Chris. How are you doing today?
This is great. This is a very surreal moment for me because never in my wildest dreams would I ever have even thought I'd have the opportunity to talk to the president of MirrOlure and you, and this is just a very surreal moment for me, sir. So I just wanted you to know right up front that I'm humbled.
Well, that's awfully nice of you, Chris. But listen, I'm just a fisherman that happens to manufacture fishing lures and have that passion for inshore, offshore, any type of fishing. And I'm just so happy to have a job which allows me to be in the fishing industry.
Now, is that so? I ask every guest that, and so obviously you owning MirrOlure, which is amazing. But how did you actually? Have you always been a fisherman? I mean, to give people a
I
little bit
was
of
so
your
fortunate.
past. Yeah.
I have a twin brother that actually is a full-time captain out of Boca Grande, Florida. He specializes in inshore fishing. And our father, he's the one that introduced us to fishing and hunting. He was a dentist, and a lot of dentists here in Florida, they take off Fridays. So
Okay.
we had a lot of Friday flus when we were going to school, and my father would take my twin brother Frank and I, and expose us to offshore grouper fishing, inshore trout, redfish, and snook. Dove hunting, deer hunting. I mean, we just really were very fortunate growing up, and that kept my twin brother and I out of problems. We didn't play sports in high school or anything. All we did was fish and hunt, and have a tremendous amount of fond memories of that. And just really want to thank my father for allowing us the great opportunities and memories he's made for my brother and myself.
And for me, that speaks volumes because my dad, and if you've heard, I talk about my dad perpetually because he has been probably the single greatest component to me in my life. And not only that, for introducing me to the outdoors, and my brother, obviously, my family. And so when we talked about it in episode 1, I had my dad on here, and the reason I wanted to have him on as the first guest of the Speckled Truth podcast was because, like anything we do fishing related, he's the first. And the reason he is because he's the reason I love this sport so much. And so, I got to give it to
Exactly.
him. And you're
Yep.
right. I mean, it
Yep. It's
starts with, go ahead, sir.
100% right. You're 100% right. And without him introducing us to the sport of fishing or hunting, this would never have been possible. I might have taken up football or soccer or baseball. Who knows? But I'm so glad that he spent time and focused on the sport of fishing for sure.
And like you were talking about Friday flus, when I was a senior in high school, I wish it would have started a little bit earlier, but he would pull me from school, especially on fall, foggy mornings. We'd go to Myrtle Grove. I never forget it. And in Louisiana Delta. And so we would go fishing. We'd catch a limited trout. And then I'd be back at school for like right before lunchtime. And he would do it on special occasions, but I think he knew the value of like,
True.
okay, my boy needs a break. I was playing baseball and stuff like that. I was into sports, but it was a way for us to kind of just get away for a moment and reconnect and be father and son and be in the beauty of the Louisiana Delta. So
Yeah,
that's super cool.
great story. And I also think, Chris, it taught us parenting skills, because that's what I do with my daughters now, is take them fishing and expose them to the outdoors and such. And why do we do that? Because that's the way we were trained, So sort of a parenting skill, if you will, as well.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I'm taking my oldest, Ramsey. He's 10. I just bought him a set of waders, but and I told him, I said, when you turn 10, you can start wade fishing with me. And
Nice.
so last year was kind of the first time he's been wading with me, and this, that, and the other thing. And he enjoys it. He definitely doesn't have the passion like I did. You know, I see
Hmm.
my middle one. He definitely has a love for it,
Hmm.
a little bit more. But he's 7, and so again, it's kind of like that rite of passage. Of course, we're going to go fishing, but to wade fish here in the Texas flats, 10 years old, you'll get your own first set of waders, and we'll
Wow.
get going, sir. So,
Wow,
but
that's awesome. That is so good.
yes, sir. So tell us a little bit about MirrOlure. So how did that get started?
Well, my grandfather back in 1937, he was a carpenter by trade.
Hmm.
And, those long winters up in Kankakee, Illinois would drive him to the basement and he'd start whittling, lures out of hardwood. And, the spring would come around. He would take those prototypes, bring them to the Kankakee River and fish for smallies and walleye and largemouth bass. And that's where he got his start. And then in the early 40s, he started. He realized that this wood thing was really very labor intensive, and he
Hmm.
felt that he couldn't produce as many lures as he needed to make a living. So that's when he started manufacturing, or going to have plastic injection machines and molds built to manufacture the lures. Some of the first original baits that my grandfather designed was called the Bassmaster, which is a little jointed bait back then, that had a metal lip to it. Little antiquated in today's standards, but it was very functional, had a terrific tight action. We actually still manufacture some of those today. They're not a great seller of ours. However, I can't discontinue my grandfather's first lure. That would be just something that I just wouldn't do. So we keep it around, and we've got some folks in the Midwest that still use them for casting for bass and that sort of thing. And that's how we got started. And then in the mid '50s, he moved down to Florida. He was manufacturing lures at that time, freshwater baits, and making a decent living. He still had to have another job. He worked in the shipyards here in Tampa. He actually lived on the Alafai River in a mobile home. So then he started dabbling, obviously, with designing saltwater lures, and that was the first one that he came out with was the famous 52M.
Okay.
Yeah, which we is still a very good seller of ours today.
And
So
still produces.
it does. It's a good surf bait as well as a wintertime bait for it sinks at a foot per second, and it's a little antiquated. It's got 3 sets of hooks because obviously back then there wasn't a lot of conservation. Back in the 50s and
Hmm.
60s, if you caught it, you obviously kept it because that was the food for the family and the neighbors. So the baits that we have been producing since like the 90s are 2 sets of treble hooks, or nowadays we have kits where you can make them single hooks as well. But
Gotcha.
that's sort of how LNS got its start, was the freshwater market, and then ironically now we're seen as a saltwater lure maker. In our market is from Brownsville, Texas to the Chesapeake. That's
Yes,
pretty
sir.
much where mirror lures are sold.
And that's what's been really cool about Speckled Truth, especially in our citation programs, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But outside of that, our Speckled Truth community, and so Speckled Truth obviously is for trophy trout conservation. That's what we're noted for, and
Hmm.
and our reach is obviously pretty much that same route, right? And so in terms of all those
Yep.
various estuaries that hold speckled trout, but now we're just kind of crazy trophy trout nerds, is what I keep telling everybody. But it's cool because what you do is you get to realize like the reach of MirrOlure, and truly understand. And we'll talk more about that here in the citation because I'm interested in your take with some of the citation data, not the actual analytics of it, but you as a lure manufacturer and a lure maker. And so, but I listened to you and Captain CA's podcast, which was it was amazing, by the way. I
Well,
really
thank you.
really enjoyed that, and I really look up to CA. I think
Absolutely.
hopefully that a lot of other people do, especially in this industry, because he's a leader, he's an
Hmm.
educator. It's far beyond just putting fish over the gunnels and into an ice chest or releasing
Right.
them. And obviously I know that's his line of work, but he's done so much with regards to, um,
He does a lot for the
it-
sport of fishing and
yes,
conservation, water
s-
quality. I mean, the list is endless, and he's definitely a great steward for our industry. That's for sure.
such an ambassador. And so
Ambassador. Yep.
I was really, I was enthralled honestly at y'all's relationship and how long that relationship had spanned. And so my question to you is, understanding UNCA's relationship, do you have relationships with other guides, with other watermen, with other folks across various estuaries that have been monumental or influential in MirrOlure's growth?
I do. I certainly do. And I cherish those relationships. Most of them are older guys because I'm an old guy. But uh, you know, uh, you sort of get to know who the folks are that are always there. They're, whether
Mhm.
they fish a bunch, and you get to know them, and they become your friends, and you learn so much because, say a Lowell Odom out in Texas or a Jay
Yeah.
Watkins, those guys are iconic legends in the field, and they see the big picture. The Scott Moores here in Florida, uh, TJ Stewart's, my twin brother Frank, they see the big picture, and that is conserving the fish, you know, and do what's right for the future generations, so they can see what we've seen in the past, and that's
Hmm.
so vital. And it just appears like there's more and more conservation. Um, I'm all about keeping some fish when it's right, but certainly there's no need to catch when you catch a trophy trout. It should be a few pictures and release it.
Yeah.
That's a given, because we know how hard it is to get to fish up to 26, 27 inches. And that fish needs to continue to breed and do its thing.
Yeah. And so the relationship, you mentioned two of those names in there, Lowell Odom and Jay Watkins. So Jay was actually on the podcast earlier this year,
Oh,
and
really? Great.
oh my gosh, honestly, that's our most downloaded episode.
Right.
But
Right.
there's really honestly not a shocker to most.
Yeah, and
But
we use those guys, to help us in understanding what's going on in their particular market. I mean, obviously, he knows the Texas coast, whether it's to the south of him, 200 miles to the north. He's got a good
mhm,
pulse of what's going on. So, I listen to those close friends, and we make lures based on what they ask us
sure.
for. But it's always good to know what's going on in the industry, because I care more about the future than I do the bottom line here at LNS Bait Company.
That's that's super interesting because that's one of the things in his main message in the podcast was obviously through the 40, and you think about it, 40 years of being on the water, chartering, guiding,
Hmm.
teaching people how to one catch fish, but aside from that, like CA, taking care of a resource. And so,
Hmm.
man, honestly, he was getting emotional in the podcast, and it shows. And I always tell people this is my own personal relationship with speckled trout and big trout, it isn't a fish. It's almost like a sibling. It is literally like a part of my family. And so getting to hold a fish, even if for a brief moment, a big fish before releasing her, it's kind of a way, it's a connection, right? It's something that's just a
Hmm.
little bit more
Yeah.
than going out there. And so it was really interesting to hear that, but also too understanding that he has 40 years of guiding
Hmm.
experience on the Texas coast and a
He's
legend in
he's
his own
seen it
right. Like
all. Yeah, he's
he
seen it all.
has,
He
but
really has.
in terms of even lore development, he knows this fishery like nobody
Hmm.
else, or very, very few. And it's just got to help with regards to how to target them. And so one of those lures has recently been the double D, the Jay Watkins double
Yeah.
D.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I see a pattern in, folks. It seems like a lot of the younger folks that come out, they're all about, I want to get my limit, I want to kill as many fish as I can. And then you get to be a little bit more, in your 30s and 40s, and it's about, hey, let's go have a good time if we catch fish. And then it seems like when you get, past your 50s, 60s, then you really say, hey, listen, I've killed enough trout, and I've caught enough fish. It's now about what can I do to help, promote, conservation and do what's right for the resource and try to educate maybe some of these people that might be taking too many fish.
Yeah. No, for
So
sure.
I don't know.
For
It's just the
sure.
way I see it. That's just my opinion.
It's just cool to hear and listen to the level of input and the level of friendship and the value that you have with these, again, kind of legends, like living legends in the game to some extent, and just how that's been monumental
Hmm.
in terms of MirrOlure's growth. And it totally makes sense why they're continuing to be productive, is like you had mentioned, that you have an ear for the fishery. And aside from that, obviously from a marketing perspective and everything else, but you create lures that catch fish. And I keep alluding to that, but we're going to talk more about that here in
Yeah,
that citation data.
absolutely.
But the reason I wanted to kind of highlight that in terms of relationships was because, again, it's all about memories and the relationships and the memories we make on the water. And one of my fondest memories, and I grew up throwing jigs. My dad and I've said this a million times, is that we fished jigs pretty much almost exclusively, soft
Hmm.
plastics. And so
Hmm.
I never really threw a whole lot of hard baits
Hmm.
until one day it was actually in Myrtle, or it actually is Lafitte. It's called Spoonbill Bay. My dad, he had a couple of 5Ms, and the rest was kind of history at that point, because that was, for me, the first top water I had ever thrown.
That's
And
pretty
so I wanted,
addicting, isn't it?
oh my gosh. Well, I'll never forget it. They had obviously a little grass flat coming off, and we're fishing a little point, and just pitching it in there. And I was so enamored just seeing a big trout, or not even a big trout, but a trout hit that 5A, that dual prop bait.
Hmm.
And so that's a memory that sticks with me forever. And so going even further, my first 7 pound trout came on an actual top dog. And then my 11 pound trout, which is my biggest trout I've ever caught, actually came on a she dog. And so MirrOlure's kind of been there throughout, but
Wow.
these are memories that I have. But for you, being the owner, do you get customers that share memories? And if so, is there one that kind of stands out to you?
Wow. You know, that's one of the best things about our business is when we get a call, typically it's someone calling to share an experience and also either tell us about that experience or to purchase a lure. And
Yeah,
they sort of go hand in hand because
sure.
they want to tell you how great the lure is doing, and then they want to place an order, and that's just so great because it's just rewarding. We live in a day where you don't get a lot of compliments and that sort of thing. So when
Sure.
someone, we sell a product that is giving folks pleasure, and that's the best thing. I mean, we got happy customers. Yeah, we got some problems every now and then. Somebody will talk about a lure issue or what have you, but we quickly take care of that, and then they're back on telling us about why this bait is the best and why it's their favorite or what have you. Now, to answer your question, what is
A
I've got one
certain
I've got one memory.
or a personal memory. I mean, for that matter, I want to put you on a spot because, again, it's just such a fixating bait. It's such a bait that just, again, obviously catching a first fish on a hard plastic bait, either top water or even, like I said, I remember still to this day as well when the Catch 2000s came out. My dad and I going out there the Chelan Pass and fishing out there in the Empire area, and just absolutely demolishing big redfish and some beautiful trout in the
Mhm.
surf right there in Chelan Pass. And so that was my true, like, first true subsurface, like, suspending style bite.
Yeah.
And it's just cool to kind of, those are kind of earmarked in the file of fishing, if you will, in your
Yeah.
brain. It's kind of
I've
funny,
got
but
I've got so many of those. It's unbelievable, and it's when you go out there and fish, you never know what you're going to see. You never know what you're going to catch. I have one. Some of the best memories are when we go take a prototype like the Catch 2000, and we'll
mhm,
take it down here to Bel Air Boat Ramp, which is just a public boat community right there. And I
mhm,
remember the Catch 2000. We're started working, and this is the first year 2000, obviously, and and it was actually a little bit before that, 1999, and we were working with the prototype, and we were figuring out what we were going to do with it, how we were going to balance it, that sort of thing, because it was really truly our first suspending style bait. And we brought it down there, and I think the first prototype that we threw, we kind of snook on it the first go around, and that was just sort of an iconic mark to a type of lure that remains our most popular type of lure that we sell today, and that's a suspending twitch bait. And so that was sort of, it marked the, hey, listen, we're on to something, plus all the other guides and resources that we use to give us input. But at that particular time, we didn't have any prototypes. We just had one, and we didn't circulate any out yet. We were trying to figure out what we thought as fishermen, as producers and maker of the MirrOlure, this is what it should be. And then we basically make up a prototype, duplicate that single prototype and, circulate it to our 200 pro staffers throughout the Southeast. And then we listen to what they have to say about the bait. But going out there, catching a fish, the first cast on that prototype,
oh my God,
that was just a great memory, and say, hey, listen, let's move forward with this, because this is going to work. So that's just one of the many, many memories that I have, Chris.
I bet. And there's probably so many. I mean, to be frank, I actually get a lot of messages with regards to, one, the podcast, but secondly, changing people's mindsets. I got one recently. Actually, I showed it to my wife because it's a pretty emotional moment. Now, I can't remember the person's name or anything like that, but I remember the gist of it, and was like, hey, I really appreciate kind of you guys' efforts to kind of just help, bring awareness to, conserving a resource. And I really appreciate it. It's definitely changed my mindset and how I approach fish, and not only that, but how to take care of them. And so just a simple message like that, it goes to your point, which is, if somebody took the time to literally sit down, think cognitively, and then put that in paper or text, and then message, I think it came through Instagram.
Yeah.
And then actually read that, it's like valued feedback, because you're like, oh my God, like maybe this is actually doing something.
It is.
And it's not like we're trying to change the world. We're just trying to say, hey guys, like take what you need, release the rest. Let's have a resource. But
exactly,
it's just very rewarding to some extent. But that's got to be super cool, especially as a global brand like MirrOlure. I know that'd be super hard for you to remember all those, but good God, I'm sure you get a ton of feedback.
We do, and all different countries, and we're fortunate because we've got some other product lines as well. We're talking mainly MirrOlure today, but we've got a company, Island Lures, and that's been around for like 50 years as well, and it's as iconic brand name in the offshore trolling market as MirrOlure is to the inshore saltwater game. So I'm just so blessed to be able to see the blue water side and hear some things about that as well. So,
and that's something I never even thought of. I tell people, if trout didn't exist, I don't even know if I'd actually like fishing. And so to then think of how large kind of the brand portfolio is in terms of Island Lures, and obviously MirrOlure, that is a large volume of species.
It sort of, it's some diversity, if you will. We do dabble a little bit in the offshore market, a little bit in the inshore market, and it all works. But, someone asked me the other day, Chris, I said, what is your favorite species and why? And I said, the speckled trout is just, it pays the bills at MirrOlure. Certainly a redfish will hit a MirrOlure, and a snook will hit, tarpon will hit a MirrOlure. But, that speckled trout has got a great attitude typically, especially the smaller ones. Now, when they get up there, it seems like over 22, 23 inches, they get a little bit more particular, and you really got to really play the good big fish game to try to trick those on artificial. But anyway, that speckled trout normally has a great attitude, and from, Carolinas to North Carolina, great eating fish. And it's just one that you can just have a lot of action, whether you want to catch it on top or below the surface on soft plastics. It all works.
Now, is that your personal favorite?
Topwater? Yes.
No. Is that your personal favorite species? Is it?
Yes.
Is it speckled?
Speckled trout. Yeah, absolutely.
I knew you were a good man, Mr. Eric.
Now, I can honestly say, I think the largest speckled trout I ever caught is only 26 inches. So I'm not even in your club, but
I get you.
one of these days I'm going to have to spend some time in your backyard of Texas, or spend more time over with Eddie on the East Coast of
Yes, sir.
Jacksonville, and catch one, 27 to maybe one over 30. That would be great to be in the 30-30 club.
That's right, sir. So, hey, open invite anytime. And obviously I know Jay and Lowell and the other folks here and legends on the coast, but that'd be really cool if you could get down here. I'd like to take a small break to sincerely thank our podcast sponsors. As you know, we're a brand about sharing the passion and pursuit of trophy speckled trout, as well as our conservation. Fortunately for us, MirrOlure, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky support that same passion, which is evident through the support of this podcast. Simply put, without these brands, none of this would be possible. And we're incredibly appreciative, and we hope you are too. Now, let's get back to the discussion. Now, so I want to segue to that because I think that's perfect. Talking about Dirty 30 and getting over here to Texas, because I alluded to this pre-show to you. I didn't share it with you though. And I want our listeners to know that I didn't share this with you. But in our citation programs, we basically ask a member when they submit a fish. Now it's got to be over 27 inches, and we'll send them a citation sticker. Now, if it's over 30 inches, we'll send them a Dirty 30 box, which includes MirrOlure product. But what we ask the anglers to do is submit their address, and then aside from that, the location, lure, and then the date it was caught, et cetera, et cetera. And so the lure, I tallied it up because I was kind of interested to see. And so to give you an idea is, so thus far, trophy trout citations and Dirty 30s and this is current through March, we've had 154 registered into our program. And so that's from Virginia all the way down to South Texas.
Wow, that's a lot of fish.
Yeah, it is actually 27 inches or above. That's actually a lot of fish. And that's understanding, like, we don't reach all the anglers across the coast. Actually, I just had a lady submit a fish yesterday, and she had never heard of us, and that's okay. That's totally fine. Again, we're just we're collecting it for the data. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. The point is that of those 154 fish, 64 of them were caught on a MirrOlure product. And so
wow.
I'll kind of give you a rundown. So 52 MR was 1, 17 MR, which is the Mirrodine, was 5, 27 MR, which is the XL, 7, the MirrOlure Provoker, which is your soft plastic line, which is 1. The Devil had 2. Top waters, so that was, I just kind of grouped those together. That was 3. The 18 MR, which is your heavy Dean, was 3. The Double D was 2. And then the Soft Dean XL was 9. And then the Paul Brown Fat Boy, 32.
Wow. Wow.
Now, I bring that up because 42% of the current citations taken this year were caught on a MirrOlure product.
Wow.
That's a lot, sir.
I'm impressed. That's impressive. I would have guessed the number would been a little lower. I had a suspicion that the Fat Boy would be the leader, because it just seems like that is a tool that a lot of trophy trout fishermen use. The Fat Boy, for sure.
Yeah, but I think it's a testament, though, again, getting back to your ability and MirrOlure's ability to make lures that catch fish. And that is tangible evidence, sir, that you are on that path, that
I appreciate that. What I like about that data is it's just not one lure. It's a series of lure. It's hard baits, top water, hard baits, sinking, our soft plastics, which is relatively new in the marketplace, but we've got some good brands, and then into the Paul Brown, and we know the legend of Paul Brown lures. So I'm really happy with that. And again, this is the first time that I've heard these statistics, and it sort of blows me away. I'm really very, very, very pleased about that.
No, but 42%. I mean, you think about all the other lure manufacturers out there, Heddon, Rapala, obviously all the soft plastic brands, Z-Man to the Matrix Shads or the Down South lures, and all these different, companies that are out there, obviously pushing product that obviously target inshore species, but yet almost half, a little less than half of all those big fish. And I mean, we're talking 27 plus to include your 30 inchers come off of your product line.
Mm.
That is awesome. And so that was what was cool listening to UNCA's podcast was talking about the form. Is it still the slogan, or was the former slogan of the record setters?
The record setters is what it. We switched it a little bit now, but the record setters is we had quite a few of them. A family tradition was original. Then we went to the record setters. So I like the family tradition, but the record setters just says it all. So
And if you don't mind, just so I mean, what was the story behind that?
oh, I really don't know. I mean, that was a little bit before my time. I
Oh, the
don't know why
records.
that. Yeah,
Uh,
I just think that we needed a change. I think that was back in somewhere around the early '90s is when we made that change, and it just sounded good at the time. I think at that time we were trying to introduce a bunch of new products and stuff like that, and we wanted to freshen the brand up. I think we did a packaging change around there too, but that was close to 30 years ago, so I don't remember quite the specifics there, Chris. I'm sorry.
oh, no worries, sir. So, but 32 caught in a Paul Brown Fat Boy. Um, can you tell us a little bit about how MirrOlure and Paul Brown and how that all came to be?
Well, it was funny back in the '90s. I'd always hear, our pro staffers, Jay Watkins, Lowell Odom. I'd hear about the Corkies, which is the Paul Brown bait that he had designed. And I'm thinking, here we have all these suspending baits that we're coming out with. And, even in the 2002, 2003, we heard all the stuff about, what was happening. And I felt that the MirrOlure could do just the same job as the Paul Brown lures. So finally, I just got so sick and tired of hearing about the Corky and Paul Brown's baits. My sales rep said to me, he said, "Well, I know Paul Brown. Do you want me to get in contact
Yeah.
with him?" And I said, "Sure." So he picked up the phone and he called me back. Mike Carey, my sales rep, called me back and said, "Yeah, Paul's interested in selling this company." And I said, "My goodness, this is happening pretty quickly." So
Yeah.
I flew over and I took my production manager, Ray Ciaffi, over here, and we met Paul and his lovely wife, Phyllis, and we started chatting and so on and so forth. And, they were up there in age and they just said, "You know what, we're tired of having people come by the store," they called it, which was their garage. And during Christmas and some holidays, he says, people are knocking on the door all the time to try to get these baits. And
Yeah.
they were tired of it. They said, "Hey, listen, we're willing to sell your company, their company." And I said, "Well, I'd love to buy it." And we worked out an agreement, and the rest is history. So it was a great business relationship, and we paid them, a lot of money for the company, and they're happy, and we're happy. So
Yeah. It-
I'm just so pleased to have that under our umbrella of products, though, Chris, because it is an iconic brand for trophy trout.
oh, it's got a cult like following, uh, whether you like it or not, sir. I'm here to tell you that the Corky Thump is a real thing, and it is like it is like the world's or the angling world's strongest drug. And
Mm,
so people will go to the ends of the earth to buy corkies and fish corkies and learn how to fish corkies just so they can feel that thump. And
yeah,
then when they feel that thump, they want to do it again. And
yes.
so it'll make them, launch the boat in 30-degree weather with it spitting sideways or whatever it is. And so it's just all to feel that thump. But it goes back to, looking at that level of production for those big fish. 32 of the 154 come on a single bait. That's definitely a testament to how good that lure is in
And,
terms of targeting those big fish.
and Chris, I remember talking to Paul in his garage, and we were talking a little bit about. I asked him. I said, "Paul, how did you come about this design of the original? Was the first one he came out with, the
Yes, sir.
Paul Brown original?" So he said, "Well, I took the 51 MirrOlure and simply, sort of cast a rough, uh, mold out of it, and then poured a soft plastic around it and put some cork in it. So that's where the name Corky came from, was the cork that he put inside the bait.
Yes, sir.
But he also found out that the cork was inconsistent, so started using some foam rubber. So, the consistency was much better. It's still not perfect. At MirrOlure, we can make it really consistent. The sink rate is not going to change, but even with a Paul Brown, uh, any type of those baits, there are air bubbles, there's the foam
Mhm.
density, and there's some small little changes that happen internally in the bait, but they're ever so slight. Most people don't even look at it, but I know for a fact from being the manufacturer and being very particular when we go to manufacture these baits.
Yeah. Now, talking with Mike McBride, my mentor, that's one of the things when we were talking about it, since MirrOlure, since sorry about that. I know you're a super busy guy.
No, no problem.
Uh,
Apologize.
is no worries. And so it's him saying, since MirrOlure is producing it, he said honestly, it's for the better, because I mean, nothing on Mr. Paul, but you get a much more consistent product in terms of fishability. And so obviously that's what we're looking at, as opposed to, and I still have Paul's Fat Boys like literally in the original packaging, sitting right here in my room, right? Many of them, I probably have like 25, 30 of them. And so they're here, but again, it goes back to the consistency and the fishability
It
of the
was,
bait.
and you know what? When you make a big step about purchasing a company, and Paul and his wife had created such a dynasty, and people loved going talking over. They still do talk about it. We love going over there, talking to Paul, and finding out what he's got. So when we purchased that company, we were like, hey, to make this work, we got to make sure Paul is happy and he oversees what's going on with the manufacturing of these baits. So these are manufactured in our sister factory in Costa Rica. We flew Phyllis and Paul down there to oversee the operation. And it was the first day Paul came walking over to me. He taught our ladies how to wrap the wires and how to put the foam in. Every detail that goes
That
into making a Paul Brown, he taught our employees down there. And the end of that day, he said, Eric, I have no problem at all with this. He says these ladies are making them better than what I did in my factory at his place there in Houston. And that
that's
made me
awesome.
feel so good. But still, we had to make sure that the public was still going to purchase them and go through. And there was nobody skipped a beat. We made them the same way, and we still make them to the same way today. And that's what's so important when you take a company over, is to make sure you
Yeah.
don't go at changing things, don't go to discontinuing things. And that's what we feel is the best success to making the brand live on, is
Yeah.
is simply don't change a thing, make them the way they were designed.
No, and that's cool, because it's almost like Paul Brown and MirrOlure are synonymous, right? I mean, everybody still calls him the Paul Brown Fat Boy. I still do,
Mm-hmm.
although they're manufactured by MirrOlure and they're a MirrOlure product, and people buy them from a MirrOlure site. And so it it's actually in Texas, you will get corrected to some extent if you call it a MirrOlure Fat Boy. It's Paul Brown's, buddy.
Yep,
Like it
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 is.
is that. And so that's really cool to see the humility, I think, on both sides, both from you and saying, Paul, this is your baby creation here, showing him that process, making sure that we're doing it right to continue that legacy, but also the humility on Mr. Paul's side is saying, hey, y'all are doing it a hell of a lot better than I could. And so that's amazing that you guys are able to produce a more consistent
It
product. And
was
so
it
what
was
a
just
symbiotic
it,
relationship there.
absolutely. And you go through things, and it's scary when you pay a lot of money for a company and you don't know what's going to work out or not. You have some things that we can't do this, we can't do that, and when it all comes through, and at the end of the day, sales are stronger than what they were the year before, and you hear the statistics that you mentioned. Of all these huge trout caught on our products, it's very rewarding. Let me just say that.
I bet. Is that MirrOlure's bestseller?
On the
The
Paul
Paul Brown
Brown,
Fat. Hmm.
the Paul Brown lures, the Fat Boy is our best seller.
I see.
But we sell a lot more mirror lures like the Mirrodine, and
Okay.
pretty much blows it away when it comes in that situation. Because I mean, we sell a lot of hard baits, we really do. Um,
Yeah.
the Paul Brown has a little bit more of a window. Typically, it's seen as a wintertime bait, even though there's a lot of people that throw it in the summertime. But it's seen like a six to 7 month window, where mirror lure, at least in a lot of these states, are 12 month seller.
Yes, sir.
So
So,
um,
so, So I don't know if you know this or not, probably not, and that's okay. But I actually wrote an article and I did a lot of study on this on the Paul Brown series. And so really the question that I had was Paul Brown or Corky season, Corky season, true or false? And so what I did is in a tank right outside my back door, I took some tap water with zero salt in it, and I measured the sink rate and profile for all the
Mm-hmm.
Paul Brown products.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I did is I basically reduced. So it was like at 75 degrees was the water temp. And then what I did is I chilled the water to 55 degrees and then I added some kosher salt because it was clean salt. And then we brought it to was 15 parts per thousand. And I have all the measurements and I've shared that with our followers in that article. And I can't remember the specifics, but let's say at 72 degrees, 0 parts per thousand, the sink rate was like, let's say 1 second per foot, right?
Mm-hmm.
At 55 degrees, at 15 parts per thousand, it slows down to like, let's say 2.5 seconds per foot.
Mm-hmm.
Then I chilled it even more. No, a correction. I didn't chill it even more. I kept it at 55 degrees and I added more kosher salt and I brought it to 30 parts per thousand. And the sink rate of these fat boys was like 3 seconds per foot. And so it shows that in the wintertime, these baits have different fishability based off of water temp and density. And so I don't know if a lot of people are thinking about that. And especially if you think about like the surroundings of it, is like, hey, we're seeing a reduced water column due to northerly winds and fallen tides and things of that nature. And those fish, when they are, especially those larger fish, are coming up shallow.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them come up shallow in these shallow water complexes here, like in South Texas,
Mm-hmm.
like Mansfield. And so now you have a capability to fish a larger profile bait that sinks really slow in a really reduced water column. And so I said, Corky season, true or false? It's true. Yeah, of course they catch fish all year, but
Mm-hmm.
going to like the specifics again, studying bait, sink rate, and profile, it does. It takes on a life of its own in the wintertime. And in not only that, I see through the other citation data that these fish are obviously eating corkies, but they're also eating big topwater baits or eating softeen XLs.
Yep,
They're looking for larger profile baits. So
they
now
are.
it's kind of the best of both worlds. You got a big
Mm-hmm.
profile bait that has a fishability for that particular condition.
Yep.
So corky season, true. That's probably why you're seeing maybe that little bit of a bump there.
Yeah, absolutely. And water salinity is so key to any really any suspending or sinking baits. Because salinities change. Typically the winter months we have less rain than the summertime, so obviously salinity can go up in that manner as well. And that's why we use our Bel Air boat ramp as a
Yeah,
salinity, and it does vary. Even along your coast, it varies quite a bit with salinity. So
it does.
it makes a difference. Where
Yes, sir.
some areas, the double D floats, and most of the time the double D floats, but there are some baits that we make that float, like say the Fat Boy floater, and other
Hmm.
areas it just sinks very slowly. So
That's
again,
correct.
it all depends on salinity and that sort of thing. So.
Yes, sir. In a baffin complex, an actual fat boy floater will literally float with
Mhm.
its nose up.
Yep.
And if it warms up, if you have a warming water column, just due to the actual density of the column, it will actually slow sink. It's actually really, really unique. But I did have one last question, Mr. Eric. I mean,
Okay.
and so I think you've kind of alluded to it a little bit because I know we're pushing time, and I'm mindful of your time by that. But so what's that process look like for you guys when designing like a hard bait to kind of dial in that proper buoyancy and sink rate and action? I mean, do y'all have like a no kidding process, or is it like, hey, let's create this thing, go test it and see what happens?
Well, we do, Chris. We look at some of our better sellers, and since the 17 is our best seller, that sink rate is one that's used or that fishermen prefer from North Carolina to Texas. So,
Hmm.
we'll match if we're going to design a particular sink rate, whether it's a sinking or a subsurface bait. We'll look at the popular sellers in that category. When it comes to surface walkers, obviously the more user friendly, the easier that bait is to walk, is what we look at, and that
I see.
has a basis on lure shape and the weight, how much weight is in the tail of the bait, whether it has twin rattles. There's several variables. I mean, we're not building rocket ships here; they're just fishing lures. But
Yes, sir.
we definitely still look at. We want these baits to fish easy and obviously produce fish. So
I got you. Well, cool, sir. Well, again, sir, super mindful of your time. I wanted to, one, say thank you for supporting Speckled Truth. Never again in my wildest dreams would I've ever said like I have, and I'm talking with Mr. Eric Botnick, but aside from that, obviously you guys being so supportive of what we're doing here at Speckled Truth, truly from myself, Kyle, Ed, and Keith, truly, truly appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
well, we're going to continue to support you guys. You guys are doing a great job, and we appreciate all you do for everyone, and getting the word out of conservation for the speckled trout. So,
Cool.
Chris, thanks for having me. I really had a great time. I always enjoy talking fishing, and keep up the great work.
Appreciate it, sir. Thanks again. Hey, for everybody else sticking around, really appreciate it. What an awesome episode talking with Mr. Eric Botnick. Again, super appreciative. But again, they're podcast supporters, so I got to give it out to Mr. Eric from MirrOlure as our podcast supporter, as well as Mr. Lowell from Texas Custom Lures and the original Custom Corky, as well as Mossy Oak Fishing. Without their support, and without Mr. Eric's support, none of this happens. So again, help support these brands that support our podcast and our cause for, again, targeting big fish and promoting conservation. So until next time, guys, tight lines, God bless, and always remember, take what you need and release the rest. God bless.